He watched the gate close and chose to walk away anyway. The announcement echoed through Terminal B, sharp and final, the kind of voice that didn't wait for second chances. Final boarding call for Flight 247 to Chicago. A few heads turned. A few people ran. But Ethan Cole stood still for half a second too long, his worn duffel bag hanging from his shoulder, his boarding pass folded between calloused fingers that had built engines and fixed things most people couldn't even name. "Sir, that's your flight," the attendant called, her tone polite but already moving on. "Gates closing." "I know," Ethan said quietly. "Last call." Another voice rang out from behind the counter, faster now, sharper. "They won't reopen it." Ethan looked up at the digital board glowing overhead. The word departed blinking like a verdict not yet spoken. Then he turned his head, not toward the gate, but toward the far end of the terminal where a woman had just stumbled, her hand gripping the edge of a metal seat before slipping. People noticed. No one stopped. The rolling wheels of carry-ons clicked against polished floors. Conversations carried on. Coffee cups lifted. Lives continued in motion. But Ethan didn't move forward. He moved sideways, then back, then against the current of people rushing toward their own destinations. "You're going the wrong way," someone muttered as he brushed past. "Hey man, gate's that way." Ethan didn't answer. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead, casting a pale glow across the terminal as he reached her. She was sitting now, barely, her posture tilted, one hand pressed to her temple as if trying to hold something in place. "Ma'am." Ethan crouched slightly, careful, steady. "You okay?" She opened her eyes slowly, disoriented but composed in a way that felt practiced. "I'm fine," she said, though her voice didn't quite match the words. "Just dizzy." "You don't look fine." He glanced around. No one had stopped. Not really. A few curious glances, then gone. "Do you have someone with you?" She shook her head. "No, all right," Ethan said, softer now. "Then you've got me for a minute." Behind him, the gate door shut with a quiet mechanical finality. A soft click. No drama. No music. Just a moment that passed without asking permission. He didn't look back. He helped her sit more comfortably, adjusting her bag so it didn't fall, offering the unopened bottle of water from his duffel. "Here," he said. "Take a sip." She hesitated, studying him briefly, the faded jeans, the worn boots, the kind eyes that didn't expect anything in return. "Thank you," she whispered. Ethan nodded once. "What's your name?" "Victoria," she said after a pause. "Victoria Hayes." The name meant nothing to him. Not yet. He just nodded again, calm, grounded, present in a way the world had almost forgotten how to be. "All right, Victoria," he said quietly. "Let's get you steady." And somewhere behind him, beyond the glass and the runway lights, the plane that was supposed to change his life began to move without him. The airport noise softened into something distant as Ethan guided Victoria toward an empty row of seats near a quiet corner of the terminal, away from the rush of travelers and the echo of rolling suitcases. And for a moment, everything slowed down in a way that felt almost unnatural, like the world had taken a breath just for them. "Sit here," he said gently, pulling out a chair. "Keep your head down for a minute." She followed without protest, her movements careful, controlled, like someone used to holding herself together even when everything inside was slipping. He noticed the way her fingers trembled slightly as she accepted the bottle again, the way her eyes scanned the space as if calculating exits, timing, possibilities. "Do you need medical?" he asked, calm but direct. "No," she answered quickly, then softer. "I just need a minute." Ethan nodded, not pushing, not questioning, just present. And that quiet presence carried more weight than anything loud or urgent ever could. 2 rows over, a man laughed into his phone. Somewhere a child cried. A boarding announcement crackled overhead, but around them there was a pocket of stillness that did not belong to the airport at all. It belonged to something older, something steadier. "You missed your flight," Victoria said after a moment, her voice steadier now, but her eyes sharper, more aware. Ethan glanced briefly toward the window where the tail of the plane was no longer visible, then back to her. "Yeah," he said simply. No bitterness, no explanation, just truth. She studied him like that answer did not make sense, like there was a calculation missing. "Was it important?" she asked, and for the first time there was something close to hesitation in him, not regret, but wait. "It was something," he said. Then let the words settle without finishing them, because some things did not need to be spoken to be understood, especially not by someone who already knew what it meant to carry responsibility. He leaned back slightly, resting his forearms on his knees, steady, grounded. "You are feeling better?" he asked, shifting the focus away from himself without making it obvious. Victoria took a slow breath, then another, her shoulders easing just a fraction. "Yes," she said. Then after a pause, "Thanks to you." Ethan gave a small nod, nothing more, as if gratitude was not something he expected to collect, just something that passed through. And for a moment they sat there in quiet, not uncomfortable, not forced, just real, the kind of silence that did not need to be filled. Then her phone buzzed, once, then again, the screen lighting up with a string of notifications she did not immediately check. But Ethan noticed the way her expression changed, not panic, not fear, something more controlled, more complicated, like pressure returning in waves. "You should probably take that," he said, already reaching for his bag as if his part in this moment was naturally ending. "Yeah," she said, almost distracted. But when she looked back at him, there was something different now, something more focused, like she was seeing him clearly for the first time. "Ethan," he said, offering his name before she had to ask. She repeated it softly, as if committing it to memory. "Ethan," then added, "I will not forget this." He smiled faintly, not dismissive, not hopeful, just accepting. "You do not have to remember anything," he replied, standing now, lifting his duffel bag back onto his shoulder. "Just get where you need to go." She watched him for a second. Longer, like she wanted to say more, like there was something forming that did not yet have words, but instead she simply nodded. And as Ethan turned to walk away, blending back into the movement of the terminal, unnoticed, uncelebrated, one truth settled quietly into the space he left behind. He had lost something that could have changed his life, and he had done it without asking for anything in return. The automatic doors slid open and closed in steady rhythm as Ethan stepped out of the terminal and into the late afternoon air, the sunlight low and warm, but carrying none of the comfort it usually held. Because some days did not feel like endings or beginnings. They just felt like quiet consequences catching up. He adjusted the strap on his duffel bag and walked toward the parking structure with the same steady pace he always had. No rush, no hesitation, just forward, even when forward no longer led where he had planned. His phone buzzed once in his pocket, then again, then a third time. He stopped halfway between two concrete pillars and pulled it out. The screen lit up with a name he recognized instantly. Mr. Grayson. The man who had set everything in motion weeks ago. The man who had said, "This is your shot. Ethan, do not miss it." Ethan stared at the screen for a second, then answered, "Hello." His voice calm, grounded, the way it always was. Ethan, the voice on the other end was sharp, controlled, but carrying a tension that did not need to be explained. "Where are you?" Ethan glanced up at the rows of parked cars, the distant echo of footsteps bouncing through the structure. "I am at the airport," he said simply. There was a pause, not long, but heavy. "The plane left 20 minutes ago," Mr. Grayson replied, slower now, like he was giving Ethan a chance to correct reality. "I know," Ethan said, and that was all he offered. Silence followed, the kind that stretched just long enough to say everything without saying anything. Then Mr. Grayson exhaled, not loudly, but enough. "Do you understand what you just walked away from?" he asked, not angry, not yet, but close. Ethan leaned slightly against the concrete pillar, eyes drifting toward the exit where sunlight spilled across the ground. "Yes," he said, steady, no defense, no excuse, just truth. Another pause, longer this time, heavier. "We had investors waiting," Mr. Grayson continued, his tone tightening. "This was not just a meeting, Ethan. This was the contract, the partnership, the thing that changes your life." Ethan closed his eyes for half a second, not to escape, just to settle something inside himself. "I understand," he repeated, and there was something in the way he said it that shifted the conversation, not defiance, not regret, something quieter, something harder to argue with. Mr. Grayson let out a breath, slower now. "Then explain it to me," he said, and for a moment Ethan said nothing, because explanations sometimes made things smaller than they were. and what he had done did not fit into a simple sentence. But still, he tried. "Someone needed help," he said, and the words landed softly, almost too simple for the weight they carried. On the other end there was a short, incredulous pause. "Someone," Mr. Grayson repeated, like the word itself was not enough. "You gave up a multi-million-dollar opportunity for someone." Ethan did not answer immediately, not because he did not have an answer, but because he did not feel the need to defend it. Then finally he said, "Yes," and nothing more. The silence that followed was different now, not confused, not questioning, just final, like a door closing without noise. "I cannot hold that position open," Mr. Grayson said after a moment, his voice returning to something more professional, more distant. "We are moving forward." Ethan nodded even though no one could see it. "I understand," he said, and he meant it. No bitterness, no resentment, just acceptance. "I wish you the best, Ethan," the voice said, softer now, almost reluctant. "You too," Ethan replied, and the line went dead. He lowered the phone slowly, the screen dimming in his hand as the weight of the moment settled, not loudly, not dramatically. Just there, steady, real. The opportunity was gone, not delayed, not postponed, gone. He slipped the phone back into his pocket and pushed himself off the pillar, adjusting his bag again. Then he walked toward the exit, into the light, with the same quiet dignity he had carried all along. Because some losses did not need to be explained to be understood, and some choices did not need to be justified to be right. The drive home felt longer than usual, not because of traffic, but because silence had a way of stretching time when there was something unspoken sitting beside you. And Ethan drove with both hands steady on the wheel, eyes forward, the late afternoon sun dipping low across the highway, casting long shadows that flickered across the dashboard like passing thoughts he chose not to chase. The old pickup truck hummed beneath him, familiar, reliable, unchanged, unlike the day he had just lived through. His phone remained quiet now. No more calls. No more chances, just the steady rhythm of the road and the quiet acceptance settling in deeper with every mile. He pulled into a small neighborhood lined with modest homes and trimmed lawns that had seen better seasons, the kind of place where people worked hard and asked for little, where life moved in routines instead of headlines. He parked in front of a small one-story house with peeling white paint and a porch light that flickered if you did not tap it twice, cutting the engine and sitting there for a moment before stepping out, because stepping inside meant returning to something that mattered more than any contract ever could. The front door opened before he even reached it. "Dad," a small voice called out, bright, warm, and real, and just like that, the weight of the day shifted, not gone, but lighter. His daughter stood there barefoot on the wooden floor, her hair slightly messy, a crayon still tucked behind her ear, like she had forgotten it was there. "You are back early," she said, tilting her head with curiosity that had not yet learned to hide itself. Ethan smiled faintly, setting his bag down by the door. "Yeah," he said, his voice softer now. Plans changed. She stepped closer, studying his face the way children do when they sense something but do not yet understand it. "Did you fix it?" she asked. And for a second he did not answer, not because he could not, but because he was deciding which truth mattered more. Then he nodded slowly. "Yeah," he said. "I helped someone who needed it." She smiled at that. Simple, immediate. No questions about what it cost, no calculations about what was lost, just understanding in its purest form. "That is good," she said, and then she reached for his hand without hesitation, pulling him gently toward the kitchen. "I saved you some dinner," she added, as if that small act was just as important as anything else in the world, and maybe it was. The kitchen smelled faintly of reheated soup and toasted bread, the kind of meal that did not impress anyone but still meant everything when it was shared. Ethan sat down across from her, the chair creaking slightly under his weight, and for a moment he just watched her as she talked about her day, about school, about a drawing she had made, about something small that had felt big to her. And he listened, really listened, because this was the part of his life that never needed a second chance. This was the part he could not afford to miss. "Are you still going on your trip?" she asked suddenly, looking up at him with eyes that carried both hope and innocence. The question hung there, quiet but heavy, and Ethan reached for his glass of water, taking a slow sip before answering. Not this time, he said gently, no sadness in his tone, just truth. She paused, processing it in the simple way children do, then nodded once, accepting it faster than most adults ever could. That is okay, she said. We can go another time. Ethan smiled again, a little deeper now, because sometimes hope did not need proof to exist. Sometimes it just needed someone willing to believe in it. And as the evening settled around them, the light outside fading into a soft blue dusk, one thing became clear without needing to be said out loud. He had lost something the world would call important. But in this small kitchen, with this quiet moment, he had not lost what mattered most. Morning came quietly, the kind that did not announce itself but simply arrived. Pale light slipping through the thin curtains and settling across the worn wooden floor, and Ethan was already awake before the alarm, lying still for a moment, as if measuring the weight of the day before stepping into it. The house was silent except for the faint hum of the refrigerator and the soft ticking of a clock that had been in the kitchen longer than he could remember. He swung his legs over the side of the bed and sat there for a second, hands resting on his knees, breathing steady, grounded. Then he stood and moved through the familiar routine, coffee brewing, toast warming, small things that did not change even when everything else did. His daughter shuffled into the kitchen a few minutes later, still half asleep, her hair uncombed and her eyes heavy but curious. "You are up early," she said, rubbing one eye. Ethan smiled faintly, pouring her a glass of milk. "So are you," he replied, setting it in front of her. She climbed onto her chair and watched him for a moment, the way children do when they are trying to understand something deeper than words. "Are you going to work today?" she asked, and the question was simple, but it carried a quiet edge now. Ethan paused for half a second, just enough to choose honesty without worry. "Yeah," he said. "I am." She nodded, accepting it without pressing further, because trust does not always ask for details. Sometimes it just believes. The drive to the garage was short, just under 15 minutes, past familiar streets and small storefronts that opened slowly with the morning, the sky still soft with early light. And when he pulled into the lot, nothing had changed. The same faded sign, the same oil stains marking the pavement, the same tools waiting behind the open bay doors. His coworker, Mike, was already there, leaning against a workbench with a cup of coffee in one hand. "Hey," Mike called out, raising his chin in greeting. "Thought you were flying out yesterday." Ethan stepped out of the truck, closing the door with a quiet thud. "Plans changed," he said. The same words, the same calm tone. Mike studied him for a second, not pushing, but noticing. "That's so," he replied, then shrugged lightly. "Well, engines did not fix themselves while you were gone." Ethan gave a small nod and walked toward the open bay, rolling up his sleeves as he stepped into the familiar scent of motor oil and metal, the kind of work that did not ask questions, just effort. Hours passed in steady rhythm, bolts tightened, engines checked, hands moving with quiet precision, and for a while, everything felt normal again, grounded, real, until his phone buzzed in his pocket. Once, then again, then a third time, different from yesterday, not urgent, but persistent. Ethan wiped his hands on a rag and pulled it out. The screen lit up with an unknown number, no name, no context, just digits. He stared at it for a second, then answered. "Hello," his voice calm, steady, the same tone he carried through everything. There was a pause on the other end, not empty, but measured, like someone choosing their words carefully. Then a woman's voice came through, clear, composed, and unmistakably familiar. "Ethan," she said. And just like that, something shifted, not loudly, not dramatically, but enough. Because some voices do not need introductions to be recognized. "It is Victoria," she continued, and the garage noise seemed to fade just slightly in the background. Tools clinking, engines humming, life continuing around him while something new quietly began. "I owe you more than a thank you," she said, her tone steady but carrying something deeper now, something intentional. "And I would like to see you again." Ethan did not answer right away, not because he was unsure, but because moments like this deserved space, deserved breath. "Why?" he asked finally, not suspicious, not hopeful, just honest. And there was a brief silence before she answered, softer this time, but certain. "Because you lost something yesterday," she said, "and I intend to make that right." Ethan looked out across the garage, at the work, at the life he knew, at the path he had accepted. And in that quiet moment between question and answer, one truth settled in without needing to be spoken. Some choices do not end when you walk away from them. Sometimes they come back, asking you to step forward again. The noise of the garage returned slowly, like sound rising after being underwater, and Ethan stood there with the phone still pressed to his ear, grease on his hands, sunlight cutting through the open bay doors and long narrow lines that made everything look sharper than it felt. "I did not lose anything," he said finally, his voice calm, steady, not defensive, just certain. There was a pause on the other end, not offended, not surprised, just listening. "You missed a flight that would have changed your life," Victoria replied, her tone measured, almost analytical now, like she was placing facts on a table one by one. "Most people would call that a loss." Ethan glanced down at the wrench in his hand, then set it slowly on the workbench beside him. "Most people were not there," he said, and the words landed without weight, but carried more than explanation ever could. Another silence followed, longer this time, softer, as if something in her understanding had shifted just slightly. "Meet me," she said after a moment, direct, no hesitation. "Today." Ethan leaned back against the edge of the workbench, his eyes drifting across the garage, mic in the background tightening. Bolts, the low hum of an engine idling, the life he knew continuing exactly as it always had. "I am working," he replied, simple, honest, and there was no apology in it, just truth. "Then after," she said, adjusting without resistance. 6 o'clock. "I will send you the address." Ethan did not answer immediately, not because he needed time to think, but because he was measuring something quieter, something deeper than schedules or locations. "Why does this matter to you?" he asked, and this time the question was not just curiosity, it was clarity. There was a slight shift in her breath, almost imperceptible, but real. "Because I am not used to people choosing me when they have something to gain," she said, her voice softer now, less controlled, more honest. "And I am not used to being the reason someone loses something important." Ethan nodded slowly, though she could not see it. "You were not the reason," he said, and he meant it, completely, without hesitation, without blame. "It was my choice." There was another pause, quieter now, more grounded. "That is exactly why it matters," she replied, and in that moment something settled between them. Not agreement, not conflict, just understanding. The kind that does not need to be explained twice. 6 o'clock, she repeated, gently this time. "I will be there," Ethan said, and the words came easier than he expected, not because he was convinced, but because something in him recognized that this was not about correcting a mistake. This was about something else, something still unfolding. "I will text you the address," she said, and then the line went quiet. Not abruptly, not rushed, just complete. Ethan lowered the phone. Slowly, slipping it back into his pocket as the world around him came back into full focus, the sound of tools, the smell of oil, the steady rhythm of work. Mike glanced over from across the bay, raising an eyebrow slightly. "Everything good?" he asked, casual but observant. Ethan picked up the wrench again, turning it once in his hand before answering. "Yeah," he said, the same calm tone, but something in it had shifted, just enough to be noticed. "Everything is good." And as he returned to the engine in front of him, tightening bolts with the same quiet precision, one thing became clear without needing to be spoken. Yesterday had closed a door without warning, but today, something else had quietly opened, not loudly, not dramatically, just enough to change where the road might lead next. The rest of the day moved with a quiet urgency that did not show on the surface, and Ethan worked through each task with the same steady hands and measured focus. But there was something beneath it now, something subtle that shifted the rhythm just enough to be felt, not seen. The clock on the wall ticked forward inch by inch until the light outside the garage softened into late afternoon gold. And by the time he wiped his hands clean and hung his tools back in place, the world had already begun to slow down. "You heading out early?" Mike called from across the bay, leaning against the hood of a half-finished truck. Ethan glanced at the clock, then back at him. "Just on time," he said, calm as always. Mike nodded once, studying him for a second longer like he wanted to ask more, but chose not to. "See you tomorrow," he said instead, and Ethan gave a small nod before stepping out into the cooling air, the sky stretching wide above him in shades of amber and blue. His phone buzzed just as he reached his truck, a message this time. Not a call. He pulled it out and read it slowly. An address. Nothing more. No explanation, no instructions, just a location in the center of the city, the kind of place he did not usually go. He stared at it for a second, then slipped the phone back into his pocket and started the engine. The drive was longer than usual, nearly 40 minutes, taking him from quiet streets into wider roads lined with glass buildings and polished storefronts, places where everything looked intentional, expensive, controlled. He parked along the curb across from a building that rose higher than anything around it, its windows reflecting the fading light like mirrors stacked into the sky. There was no sign, no obvious name, just a clean facade and a set of doors that opened without effort. Ethan stepped out of the truck and looked up for a moment, not impressed, not intimidated, just observing. Then he crossed the street and walked inside. The lobby was quiet, almost too quiet, the kind of silence that came from design, not absence. Polished floors, soft lighting, a front desk that looked more like a sculpture than a place to check in. A man in a dark suit stood near the entrance, not blocking the way, just present. "Mr. Cole," he said as Ethan approached, not asking, but confirming. Ethan nodded once. "This way," the man replied, turning without waiting, leading him across the lobby toward a private elevator that opened with a soft chime. No buttons pressed, no hesitation, just access. They stepped inside, and the doors closed smoothly. The ascent was silent. No music, no announcements, just the subtle shift of motion upward. Ethan stood with his hands at his sides, calm, grounded, the same presence he carried everywhere. The doors opened again into a space that felt different from anything he had stepped into before, not louder, not more crowded, just elevated. Wide windows stretched across the far wall, the city below glowing in early evening light. And in the center of the room, standing near the glass with her back partially turned, was Victoria, but she was not the same woman from the airport. The softness was gone, replaced by something sharper, more defined, her posture straight, her presence unmistakable, the kind that did not ask for attention but commanded it without effort. She turned as he entered, her expression calm but focused. "You came," she said, her voice steady, but carrying something more now, something intentional. Ethan stepped forward slowly, stopping a few feet away. "You asked," he replied, simple, grounded, unchanged. She studied him for a moment, longer than before, as if confirming something she had already begun to understand. Then she nodded once. "Good," she said quietly. And in that moment the distance between who she was at the airport and who she was now became clear without needing explanation. Because some people do not reveal their world all at once, they wait until the right moment. And as the city lights flickered on behind her, one truth settled into the room without being spoken. This meeting was not about gratitude anymore. It was about something much bigger. Victoria took a slow step forward, the soft click of her heels barely audible against the polished floor. And for a moment neither of them spoke, the city stretching endlessly behind her through the glass like a reminder of the world she controlled, not loudly, not aggressively, but with a quiet certainty that filled the room. "You look exactly the same," she said, her voice calm. But there was something beneath it now, something closer to respect than observation. Ethan gave a slight nod, his posture unchanged, hands relaxed at his sides. "So do you," he replied. And it was not flattery, just truth. But the truth now carried a different meaning because he could see her clearly, not as the woman sitting alone in an airport chair, but as someone who shaped outcomes, who moved pieces others never saw. She gestured toward a seating area near the window. "Sit," she said, not as a command, but as an invitation that assumed acceptance. Ethan walked over and sat without hesitation, steady, grounded, as if the setting did not alter who he was. She remained standing for a second longer, studying him again, then joined him, placing a slim folder on the table between them. "Do you know who I am?" she asked, direct, no hesitation. Ethan glanced at the folder, then back at her. "You told me your name," he said, and that was all. No curiosity, no attempt to fill in the gaps, just what was given. Victoria let out a small breath, Not frustration, not amusement. Something in between. Victoria Hayes, she said again. This time with weight. Chief Executive Officer of Hayes Global Systems. She watched him carefully, waiting for something to shift, surprise, recognition, reaction, but Ethan only nodded once, slow, respectful, but unchanged. All right, he said, and the simplicity of that response landed heavier than anything else could have. For a brief second, the corner of her expression softened, like something in her expectations had just been rewritten. Most people would have looked me up by now, she said quietly. Ethan leaned back slightly in his chair, his gaze steady. Most people would not have stayed, he replied, and the room went still for a moment, not silent, but settled, because that answer carried more than words. It carried a line that did not need to be crossed again. Victoria looked down at the folder, then slid it gently across the table toward him. Inside that is the contract you were supposed to sign yesterday, she said, her tone returning to something more composed, more structured. The one you missed. Ethan did not reach for it immediately. He looked at her instead. You said you wanted to make it right, he said, not questioning, just aligning what she had said with what was in front of him. She nodded once. I do, she replied, but not like this. Ethan's eyes moved to the folder, then back to her again, and something shifted, subtle but real, because this was not about replacing what he lost. This was something else, something not yet defined. Then what is this? He asked. Calm, steady, and Victoria leaned forward slightly, her hands resting lightly on the table, her voice softer now, but more intentional than before. This is what the world thinks you deserve, she said, pausing just long enough for the weight to settle. What I am offering you is something different. Ethan watched her, not skeptical, not convinced, just present. And for the first time since he walked into that room, there was a faint flicker of curiosity in his eyes, quiet, controlled. But there, Victoria met his gaze fully now, no distance left, no performance, just clarity. Yesterday, she continued, her voice steady but carrying something deeper. You chose a stranger over everything that could have changed your life. She let the words sit for a second, not as praise, not as judgment, just fact. Then she added, softer, that is not something I can ignore. The city lights outside had fully come alive now, reflections dancing across the glass as the sky darkened, and in that moment, with the folder still unopened between them, one truth became undeniable without needing to be spoken. This was no longer about a missed opportunity. This was about a new one being defined on entirely different terms. Victoria let the silence sit between them for a moment longer, not as a tactic, not as pressure, but as respect for the weight of what she was about to say. Then she reached forward and gently turned the folder so it faced him. But still, she did not open it. I could sign that contract right now, she said, her voice calm, measured, and give you everything you were supposed to have yesterday. She paused, watching him closely, not for reaction, but for understanding. The position, the salary, the future that comes with it. Ethan's eyes moved briefly to the folder, then back to her, steady, grounded, unchanged. But that would not be honest, she continued, softer now. Because that deal was built on what you could do. She leaned in slightly, her tone shifting, deeper, more personal. What I am offering you now is based on who you are. The room seemed to quiet even further, as if the city itself had stepped back to listen. Ethan remained still, not rushing, not reaching, just present in the moment. Yesterday, she said, her voice steady but carrying something that had not been there before, something closer to conviction. You gave up something most people spend their entire lives chasing, and you did it without hesitation, without negotiation, and without expecting anything in return. She let that truth settle, not as praise, but as fact. Then she added, that is not a skill, Ethan, that is character. Ethan exhaled slowly, not overwhelmed, not uncertain, just absorbing what was being placed in front of him. So here is my offer, Victoria said, and this time she opened the folder, turning it slightly so he could see the contents. But her eyes never left his. I want you to come work with me, not as an employee filling a role, but as someone who helps shape how this company moves forward. She tapped the page lightly, not drawing attention to numbers, but to meaning. You will have the same financial package, the same security, But more than that, you will have a seat at the table where decisions are made, where values matter. Ethan looked down at the document now, not scanning it for details, but acknowledging its presence. Then back at her. Why me? He asked, simple, direct, and Victoria did not hesitate. Because you are the kind of man who walks away from power when it costs you your integrity, she said, her voice quiet but unwavering. And I need someone who will do that even when I do not. The words settled into the space between them, not dramatic, not loud, just real. Ethan sat there for a moment, the city lights reflecting faintly in his eyes, his hands resting calmly on his knees. And then he spoke, not quickly, not slowly.